Aloha guys, Dr. Tom Walker's back. We're going to continue our fascinating discussion about the cells. Now we mentioned that the cell membrane is extremely complex in mammalian cells, and what gets in and out of the cell is tightly regulated and controlled. We also said that some things can move around through passive diffusion or passive methods which do not require energy. Active methods do require energy. Okay, we were talking about the alveoli, the little air sacs in the lungs, and how the blood gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, move from areas of higher concentration into areas of lower concentration, which is diffusion, which does not take any energy, which is great because there's such an enormous amount of this going on, guys, that if it was an active process, we couldn't keep up with it. Okay, now if we have to help it a little bit, that's called facilitated diffusion. An example they got here is glucose, blood sugar. It has to be helped through the cell membrane. Can you guess what substance does that? Most of you know, even if you don't know that you know. And of course, it's the hormone insulin. That's what insulin does. Okay, helper molecule within the membrane assists with the movement of substances from higher to lower concentration. For whatever reason, glucose, which is essential in most of the cells of the body for fuel, that's what's burned to produce ATP in the mitochondria, requires energy, or it requires insulin to get it into the cell. Passive transport, osmosis. Okay, now osmosis is another one of these events that just occurs in nature. Again, the tendency to want to reach a point of equilibrium. Even in outer space among galaxies and stuff, that principle is somewhat at work. Okay, here's what osmosis is. It's a movement of water from an area with more water to an area with less water. Yeah, that's one of the worst explanations I've ever heard, but okay. All right, you're taking container water. It has a selectively permeable membrane. If it had glass here, nothing would happen. It has to be a membrane that it can pass through. And if you have a high concentration of something, let's say you put a bunch of salt in it, on this side, and there's not as much on this side, the water over a period of time, sometimes it takes several hours, will pass through this membrane, and see how it's raised up the water level on the side B to make it the concentration gradients equal, to make the amount of concentration of salt equal. This is called osmosis, and our body uses it a great deal. It's used a lot, and it's seen all through nature. Okay, so it's the passive, means it doesn't require any energy. As long as there's a membrane that the water can pass through, over time the water will move from this side to the concentrated side in order to make them the same concentration on both sides. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Osmosis, very important. Tonicity. The ability of a solution to affect the volume and pressure within a cell. Now again, guys, this also is based on the principle of wanting to reach equilibrium. An isotonic solution, like the stuff that is like, for example, if you get an IV in a hospital, they'll often will just be giving you isotonic saline, salt water. When it's isotonic, it means it's the same salinity, would that be the right word? I think so, as the other fluids in the body. So as long as it's the same outside and inside the cell, it's isotonic. Hypotonic is when there's a lot more salt inside in whatever imaginary cell this is, than out here, and it will draw water into it. In fact, it can make it boom eventually. In a hypertonic solution, hypo means less than something, hyper means more than something, like hypertension, elevated blood pressure. So in other words, if we took a freshwater animal, like a trout, and put it in ocean water, a lot of the fluid would be sucked out of it because it's a hypertonic situation. The concentration of salt in the water is greater than what's within the trout's body, so it'll draw it out. Now, of course, fish that live in the ocean have adapted to that where that's not a problem. Filtration. I don't like this example at all, and I'll tell you why. Okay, they're talking about filtration. Now, if you make coffee in the morning, you do filtration every morning with your Mr. Coffee machine, but gravity is what causes that. Well, it has to be pumped up. That takes energy, electrical energy, and then it filters back down. Okay, here's what I don't like. They're using a syringe like what we get injections with in a medical office, and it's showing, oh well, we're doing this. It's passive. It's passive because it's filtration. It's not passive because somebody's thumb has to be on this plunger moving it. So this is a poor example of what they're trying to say. Movement of water into dissolved substances from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. Okay, yeah. But yeah, they got to be pushed. Well, that's not passive. Some medical assistant's thumb has to be on that going. And this is not a good example either, but within the vascular system of the body, guys, a lot of the little tiny blood vessels, which are known as capillaries, are so small that red blood cells have to line up in single file to work their way down through there. It's really amazing. And it's just showing, in the arterial system, the force of the heart left ventricle contracting is what pushes that through there. I guess it's in line with what they're saying here. So let's take another example that's not here. The kidneys filter the blood constantly, 24/7, all the time. They're amazing structures. And there are miraculous filters. The nephron, it's called. The glomerulus surrounded by Bowman's capsule. And they do an extraordinary job of filtering. But the reason they filter is not because of a passive process, it's because of the blood pressure. And the glomerular filtration rate, it's called, is dependent upon the blood pressure. So if your blood pressure drops real low, your kidneys will stop filtering. So I normally don't criticize anything like this, but this is not a good example in my opinion. And I probably didn't do much better either. So, all right, now, active transport. Some things have to be pumped in and out of the cell. Sodium is a perfect example. Sodium is pumped out and it comes rushing into when a nerve cell is stimulated, and that's what produces, largely what produces a nerve signal. Active transport pumps move substances from an area of lower concentration to an area of high concentration. See, that's why you need the energy, guys. It'll do it naturally if it's from high to low. But going against the gradient, low to high, takes energy. Requires the input of energy, and of course the energy in all living things is adenosine triphosphate, ATP. So here's an old-fashioned pump handle. Showing how you got to put some elbow grease in it. Okay, endocytosis is when the cell moves something into itself. If it eats something, like say a white blood cell that eats a bacterium, that's called phagocytosis. That's a term you need to know if you don't already. Cell drinking, like moving water or a saline solution into the cell, is called penocytosis. So what happens is, in endocytosis, these are two types of endocytosis. The cell membrane will invaginate, that's what they call it, and it'll surround, it wants to take in these particles here, whatever they are, and it'll form a vesicle around it, and then it'll pull loose from it and move on into the cell. Of course, that takes energy. There's nothing about concentrations, gradients, and things like that. In an instance like this, it takes energy. By the same token, a cell might export substances, which is called exocytosis. Secretion of cellular products out of the cell, like the cells of some of our hormone, our glands, and things like that. It's sort of in reverse. Okay, cells divide by a process called mitosis. They form a copy of the DNA, and it separates, and the cells pinch off in the middle and pop. They make 2 new daughter cells. Body cells do that. It's called mitosis. That's a very important word to know. The sex cells, which are there's only 2 sex cells in the human, the egg and the sperm, undergo a second mitotic division called meiosis. The reason is, guys, the egg and the sperm has to have half the number of chromosomes as the body cells do. That way, when you get half from your mother and half from your father, and when they unite, you have a full normal complement of 46 chromosomes. So sex cells have to undergo a second mitotic division to achieve 23 chromosomes in each one, instead of having 46. Because we want to have 46 as the end product. See, that is called meiosis, and it's only seen in the sex cells. Now, however, normal cells don't reproduce all the time. They undergo a cyclical series of events, a cell cycle. Most of the time, the cells is in the resting and preparatory phase. Mitosis is here just in this part. Now, notice I said normal cells because, unfortunately, the characteristic of cancerous cells is that they often reproduce near continually. That grows a massive amount of tissue that we don't need and also sucks energy out of the body. Yeah, okay. I'm trying to budget our time here. Interphase is the resting phase. This G1, S phase. And then the M phase is the actual mitosis, the actual cell division. And it has 4, here's the word mitosis again. It has 4 stages. Prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Here that is again. They line up. First they, excuse me, after I talk a lot, my voice starts getting a little... Okay, very briefly, they make a duplicate of the DNA of the chromosomes. They double it, make identical copies of it. Then they line them up in the middle of the cell. They divide. Here's the centrioles we mentioned earlier, the organelles that play such an important role. This is what they do. They have little fibers, and they draw that stuff to opposite ends of the pole, and then it separates in the middle, and then here we have 2 identical daughter cells. Unless there's some sort of a genetic problem, they'll be exactly the same. Okay, cells differentiate. We have a number of stem cells in the body that are undifferentiated. For example, here shows a stem cell. With the right enzymes, it'll form a nerve cell or a red blood cell, a muscle cell, a bone cell, an epithelial cell, which you don't know what those are yet, but you will soon. Notice it's enzymes that accomplish this. Stem cells, relatively undifferentiated or unspecialized cells, whose only function is the production of additional unspecialized cells. The rate of stem cell division varies with the tissue type. The stem cells within the bone marrow and the skin are capable of dividing more than once a day. The stem cells in the adult cartilage may remain inactive for years. If we have abnormal cell growth, we can create a tumor, guys. A benign is a non-cancerous tumor. And of course, the malignant is the term for cancerous. Cells extend and invade surrounding tissue. Apoptosis leads to cell death. Now, this is very important, and this is not a good place to put. Apoptosis is a necessary cell death, where it takes care of old and healthy cells. It's a good thing. It shouldn't be put in here with the tumors, which are called neoplasms. Necrosis is it's the bad kind of cell death. Apoptosis is good. It's programmed cell death. Necrosis is unprogrammed. If you suffer a heart attack and the blood flow to the myocardium, the heart muscle is impaired, that tissue will die and become necrotic. And if enough of it dies, you know what will happen. You will die. Okay, guys, we covered it. We covered mitosis and meiosis. Well, we actually just mentioned meiosis. Meiosis is simply a second cell division where the DNA do not replicate. Because what we want are egg and sperm cells with 23 chromosomes. So when they fertilize and unite, it has a full complement of 46 chromosome, which is what they're supposed to have. Okay, that's it. We'll see you next time for Metabolism. This is Dr. Tom signing off.